one maybe.
Okay.
I'm okay. I'll be fine. But
That's a classic phrase. I'm okay. I'll be
No.
fine.
okay, I'm okay. I'm not screaming.
Okay. I got this.
I'm not worried.
I'm not worried at all.
What, me worry?
Yeah, really worried.
Date myself by saying I'm okay, you're okay, right?
Hey, there you go. How to get to yes.
We get to yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Draft. Is that? No, it's not. Hang on, let me get it.
okay, everybody, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourselves except for Gregory.
Yes. Hang on. Well, I don't know where that is. That's okay. We're just gonna go for it.
Are you sure, Greg? I can email it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I've had tougher deals
You
before.
have it memorized?
No. Any rate, well, welcome everybody. Welcome back. Happy holidays to you, and welcome to session number 12. This is the last session of the fall series, the autumn series of the Thursday Conversation, and we are in the midst of planning out the winter series. You'll hear more about that during the holiday break. But welcome to tonight. And as Lori mentioned, Fred is on his way back. He's been kind of multitasking, getting ready for holiday services, recordings, and all of that. So we're going to go ahead and start. And what I'd like to do, being this is our final session of the autumn series, is to start off with a question for you about your thinking and about how things may have changed for you since we started this journey together. Are we there?
Yes.
Okay. And really the question is this. If you could think about the series, what is one thing of how your mindset has changed about racism in the past 3 months? And what I would like to do is just invite you to have an open, off mute discussion or sharing of your one thing. I know for me, I could count more than one. So you might, if you're like me, think about what is the most profound thing? How have you changed? So I'll just give you some silence to do that. And when someone is ready,
Yes, please feel free to unmute yourselves.
Okay. I had a good pen out here.
Oh, I just gave it to you.
I'll take us off. Everybody got the question there?
Yep.
That's all right.
Shall I come off of the
Yes.
screen share? Everybody got it?
Well, maybe they have it here.
So that we can see
There
your
we go.
lovely faces. What is one thing? How your mindset has changed.
The first thing I think of is I didn't realize that I was racist. I just assumed that was the bad people, the mean people, the other people, but not me. I didn't realize. I just ignorant.
So you bought into, like I did, the good bad binary.
Exactly.
Mhm.
That's what I was taught.
Yep.
Socially.
You know, I think for me, having the different speakers come in has totally changed my perspective of what it's like, just a tiny little glimpse of what it's like to be a person of color and what they have endured. I was clueless, quite frankly, at a very deep level. So that's made a big change in my thinking.
Very nice. Thank you, Janet.
Mm-hmm.
That also helps us too as we plan, because we have ideas and plans for other guest speakers that I think you'll very much enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I've realized is that the phrase "I'm colorblind" really doesn't mean anything in effect, because people of color want to be recognized for what they are, not what you're looking past and saying they're not. So I think that that phrase has changed its meaning totally for me.
Bobby?
Very good, Neil.
I guess the biggest change is the one I'm most ashamed of. And that is, I'm not as clueless as I thought. In other words, I spent quite a bit of the series saying, why didn't I know that? Why didn't I know that? Why didn't I know that? And to come face to face with the idea that, hey, I knew that. In other words, there's so much that I did know and did nothing that I'm dealing with how to change that. That's what I'm dealing with now.
Wow.
And so there we go.
Bobby, what does that look like to you when you say, I'm dealing with that now?
Well, my next trick was to say, well, what do I do next? And it's like, Bobby, what do you do next? If you're confronted with anything else, you hit Google, you start going to websites, you start seeing how can you, I mean, I'm linked into a whole bunch of writers on Twitter. And for the last couple of years, I've been kind of not doing anything with them, but I had some connections, and I just, I don't know, got lazy, so I'm trying to see how can I educate myself, how can I do inner work, and then I have to figure out next steps. I can't say like, okay, you know, to anybody else. So this has made an impact, a massive impact on me.
That's excellent, Bobby.
I
Oh,
think
well.
I can, yeah, Rich, Janice's husband.
Yeah, Rick.
I've talked in the past of growing up in a very industrial area in Northwest Indiana, just outside of Chicago. Played sports with black kids, took showers with them, educated with them in junior high and senior high. Our town had an area with a lower income blacks, in fact, probably with very little income, called the Patch. It was in the northeast side of the city near Lake Michigan. You know, we all kind of took it for granted, even though we, as I say, played sports with them. I had friends in the black community. Every time I went back up there in that area, which is really just a few blocks from the main downtown area, we just turned our face and said, well, I guess I just said, well, I guess that's the way it has to be. And nobody did anything about it. No one had refrigerators. In fact, my twin brother delivered ice there as a summer job. So, the old ice boxes.
Mhm.
So, you know, we just did those kind of things. But now I realize that, you know, I was a racist along with the whole city being racial. And finally, I did find out that it's no longer there. Of course, I'm talking about late 40s and early 50s. So it's no longer there. And to end my conversation, my friend sent me an email today. It's called A Place Called Home. It's a Facebook. And I talked to him earlier about racism in this town. He sent me a photograph of a Christmas celebration up in the Patch. I hate to say that, but that's what it was. And the kids were smiling. The black kids were smiling, clothes. They had their skirts, and some even had patent leather shoes. And they had a black Santa Claus with glasses, and he had a beard that went on forever. So I must say they did have their Santa Claus in that part of town. So,
But it was segregated.
it was segregated, definitely.
Yeah.
It was a segregated community.
Wow.
That's my
Okay.
comment.
Thanks, Rich. That's very good. For those of you that are just joining us, we're doing a kind of a little round about identify one thing, how your mindset has changed about racism in the past 3 months, as kind of in honor and kind of a harvest of this is our last session for the autumn series. So continue. We've had some great comments.
This is Carol,
Hi, Carol.
and I have a request that's going to sound a little weird, but I need to say it. When I'm done with my sentence, do not tell me, oh, that makes sense. Good job, Carol. Good comment. I do not want my comments commented on or graded, or it's irritating to me. I'm going to speak from my heart, and I don't want anybody else to judge my heart. So just swallow your thoughts. How's that for blunt?
Got it.
Accepted.
My main learning or main shift has been learning that racism in the world preceded slavery, that racism was already active in Europe. We didn't invent it. We may have perfected it, but the fact that slavery was, I used to learn that slavery was America's original sin. And no, I now see it as racism being the sin that preceded slavery and goes on after slavery.
Thank you. Next. One thing, how your mindset has changed about racism in the past 3 months. Anyone else?
I have to agree with Janice and Janet. I certainly didn't think that I was racist in any way, shape, or form. So this has opened my eyes about racism and what it really is, and trying to understand where all the Black Lives Matter people are really coming from with their marches and the destruction that has happened in Portland and lots of other cities, even though I don't really think that they have been the ones that have been so destructive. Just trying to understand what's really going on and how is that happening and how can we make any difference? I have no idea where to go to make a difference other than not to be a jerk.
Well, that's a pretty big difference. Phoebe. And I think many people follow what you're saying. It's
Yes.
like, what do we do? How do we right the wrongs? Where do we go from here? And it's all a learning experience. And part of it is stop being a jerk.
And that is really the focus of session 12 is where do we go from here? Before we move on to that, though, as a nice segue, is there anyone else that would like to share on that question?
I just wanted to share, I guess, not necessarily what I've gotten from the last 3 months, but really just now, the sharing that came from this question. I really appreciate the effort of everyone on this conversation and trying to understand. And Bobby, I really am grateful for your transparency, because it's the truth. You know, if it's anything else that you want to know, you go to the sources to find out. You don't ask people, what do I do next? You do what you need to do. And I really appreciate that honesty, which, you know, because when I hear teach me, I want to learn, and I'm thinking, there's a plethora of information out there, and it doesn't take much effort to look it up. And so I really appreciate all the responses. And even Carol, I know you were saying you didn't want your response critiqued. And I agree. I think that's one of the things that we as facilitators have to be mindful of, is that when we, as teachers, you don't want to alienate people by making them afraid to say what they want to say, because what they say may not be received. And so I appreciate Carol's admonition. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie.
For me, probably the biggest aha is a change of perspective from looking at this as a personal or interpersonal problem to a systemic problem. Much more daunting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Martin. Appreciate that. Anyone else?
Hi, Greg. Everyone.
Hi, Ethel.
Hi, Dr. Hasbala.
Today I heard something that reminded me of the group. We were talking about, maternal and child health in the US today. And when the topic of racism and social injustice came up, the facilitator said, microaggressions are not micro, they're macro.
Mm-hmm.
And she just went further to talk about that and made some of the points that we make, each week. And so it just reminded me of the importance of continuing the conversations.
Well said. Thank you. Appreciate that, Ethar.
Of course.
Anyone else? Father Fred, welcome. I am tempted to give you some time to catch your breath. You've been a busy man. We appreciate what you've been doing for the better of the world. And but I'll defer to you if you want to start. But otherwise, I'm going to keep going.
You keep going for a while.
All right. You sit back and relax. You deserve it.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, excellent harvest. I'm glad we have these recorded. They will be food for thought for as we continue our planning of the winter series, for sure. Definitely for sure. All right. Everyone see that? The question we just answered?
Yes.
The focus of our session tonight is where do we go from here? Good segue into it. And it's really about transforming our paradigm. We're going to start moving as we get into the next series, the next season, is about additional terms that we need to learn that you have not heard of probably. And also about start getting closer to action. What do we do? How do we deal with these things that we're feeling and that we're learning? We've got to do something with them, right? It can't just be a desire, it can't just be a dream. It's got to be followed up with some action. So, and during week 9, we talked about white fragility in action, and we identified the common emotions, the behaviors and claims that white people make when they're confronted with racism. Remember, we looked at emotions like anger, guilt, grief, insecurity. Then they're usually followed by behaviors like denial, withdrawal, silence, changing the subject. I don't want to talk about this, minimizing it, or hysterizing. I'm not even sure if hysterizing is even a word, but I put it in and my spell checker didn't hit it. So I'm using it as a behavior of those people that think they're experts on history. And then they lay claims of this is all in the past. This is all history. It all ended with, the laws and Civil Rights Act. Isn't it all? It's all history now. And they lay claims like, well, I've got black friends, or I'm colorblind, or I work for racial justice. I'm a really good person, actually. I can't be, I'm not racist, you're wrong, right? And so let's look at an example of that. Hang on, I gotta turn on the fan.
I'm right here. Oh, yes, sir. Do you know Lynn Patton? Yes, I do. I asked Lynn to come today in her personal capacity to actually shed some light. How long have you known Ms. Patton?
I'm responsible for Lynn Patton joining the Trump Organization and the job that she currently holds.
Well, I'm glad you acknowledged that, because you made some very demeaning comments about the president that Ms. Patton doesn't agree with. In fact, it has to do with your claim of racism. She says that as a daughter of a man born in Birmingham, Alabama, that there is no way that she would work for an individual who was racist. How do you reconcile the two of those, Mr.
As neither should I, as the son of a Holocaust survivor.
Just to make a note, Mr. Chairman, that just because someone has a person of color, a black person working for them, does not mean they are racist. And it is insensitive that someone would even say racist, say it is racist in itself, and to use a black woman as a prop to prove it otherwise. And I can submit this for the record. If a colleague is thinking that that's what I'm saying, I'm just saying that's what I believe to have happened. And if, as a person of color in this committee, that's how I felt at that moment, and I wanted to express that. But I am not calling the gentleman, Mr. Meadows, a racist for doing so. I'm saying that in itself, it is a racist act.
Well, I hope not, Mr. Chairman, because I need to be clear on this particular. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Meadows, wait a minute.
I've defended you with false accusations.
Mr. Meadows, I'm the chair.
Yes, sir, you are.
Thank you. I will clear this up. Now, Ms. Tlaib, I want to make sure I understand. You were not intending to call Mr. Meadows a racist, is that right?
No, Mr. Chairman, I do not call Mr. Meadows a racist.
No,
I am trying,
hold
as a
on.
person of color, Mr. Chairman, just to express myself and how I felt at that moment. And just for the record, that's what was my intention.
All right. All right. Mr. Meadows.
Mr. Chairman, there's nothing more personal to me than my relationship. My nieces and nephews are people of color. Not many people know that. You know that, Mr. Chairman. And to indicate that I asked someone who is a personal friend of the Trump family, who has worked for him, who knows this particular individual, that she's coming in to be a prop, it's racist to suggest that I asked her to come in here for that reason. Mr. President, the president's own person, she's a family member. She loves this family. She came in because she felt like the president of the United States was getting falsely accused. And Mr. Chairman, you and I have a personal relationship that's not based on color. And to even go down this direction is wrong, Mr. Chairman.
First of all, I want to.
How do we change that? Emotions, behaviors, and claims. The way we change it, when we talk about where do we go from here, part of the answer is how we change the behavior and those reactions. Envision this, that what would it be like if we could transform our racial paradigm? A paradigm is our frame of reference. Our paradigm is how we see the world based on all the information that we've gathered and the beliefs that we possess. That paradigm is informed by what we've learned in history class, our experiences living in our segregated communities, and what we consume as news. Our paradigm contributes to the negative and the closed emotions, behaviors, and claims that we often see expressed when we're confronting racism. Let's think about changing that. What does it look like? So instead of exhibiting white fragility by feeling cornered, accused, attacked, and reacting by withdrawing or being silent, being defensive, and perhaps saying things like, I'm not a racist, I've got black friends, I lead an anti-racism Thursday conversation series, or I don't see color, I'm colorblind. We would instead respond with transparency, honesty, humility, openness, reflection. It's a new way of responding. It's going to take habit breaking. It's going to take change. Perhaps it's a new way of responding where we pause, we reflect, we respond. The interchange you just saw, think about that if they had used this new way of responding. A new paradigm based on being informed, based on historic truth. We pause, we reflect, and we respond. Then we respond.
So Greg, I have a question for you.
Of course.
So how would we rewrite? What do our participants think the video we just saw, the scenario we just saw, how would we rewrite that to fit this?
Using that, how could it have been different is what you're asking.
Exactly.
You know, that's actually a really good question for the group. I would ask the group that before I respond, because that's where the real learning is. I prepared the presentation. So does anybody want to grab that? How could that have gone if you had used a new paradigm? Because that's really what we're talking about. Where we go from here? Well, one thing, we got to change the way we think.
Greg, I don't know that I can answer that question directly, but for me, clearly what you're suggesting is something that I can own and do for myself. But if you think you can change Mark Meadows' paradigms, you're truly a miracle worker. And walking on water couldn't be too far behind.
Mm-hmm.
Could we take down the slide so I can see people? Because once the slide goes on, I'm blind to everybody.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
What else? How else could that have gone?
Well, as I sat here and listened to that exchange, I remember when I first saw it on the news, there were so many. I mean, the old business. Some of my best friends are black. They're, in this case, it was what was it, nephews or nieces or something were of color. And I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, you didn't know that, or you did know it. But one of the things that I was reflecting on as I was listening to this is I remember when I started teaching my first year in high school teaching in 1963. And I was teaching world geography that year. And we got to China. And We know anything about China, I mean, communist China, Red China. But all what we said was that, well, they're poor. There's Great Depression going there. A lot of people are hungry. But that's all we knew because we didn't have any entree into China. And I look back on that, I think that's what we taught those kids that were going through our classes, that were freshmen going through our classes. And then as I've thought about this during the last 3 months, one of the things we're not doing well is teaching history. We are not teaching history. And we're not teaching civics. Let me throw that in there too. Civics, what is civics? It's government. And so we're talking about government action, and some of these imbeciles that we've been watching on the news know nothing about government. They've never read the Constitution. When we talk about voting rights and all, they don't know anything about voting rights. And so I've reached the conclusion, and in fact, I was talking to somebody the other day about running for the school board. I think it's getting as basic as that we've got to talk about curriculum in schools. And I'm not talking about brainwashing. I'm just talking about honest to goodness teaching history and civics. And I think a major part of that should be, we talk about racism. Well, you know, these kids, some of them are getting, what they're getting at home is racism. And so there's no counter to it. You know, many kids that are graduating from school, from high school, have no idea what it is. You know, they know about the Civil War. They know maybe a little bit about Martin Luther King or Booker T. Washington, maybe. And that's maybe a you know, more advanced school district. But you know, and I say that kind of in jest, but you know, that's where I think we are. We've got to look at that. If we're talking about, you know, we're talking about people learning where a subject goes and a verb and all of that stuff in a sentence. Well, you know, we got to start putting some subjects and verbs in our curriculum in school, in our history classes, and I think that's just terribly important. And I don't think anything's going to be done until we do that. And I think one of the problems we're having too is we're electing people to public office that have no understanding at all about what's going on in government or civics. They really don't understand what it is. And I've heard some people that have been just elected to office and they have no clue what's going on. And so I think one of the problems, and it's solvable. It really is solvable.
Neil, you had a comment? You need to unmute yourself, Neil.
To continue with Fred's comments about history and teaching history and racism and people of color, well, we were taught in school the attitudes towards the Native Americans, the Redskins, the blacks, the slaves, the Chinese, the laborers. We were all taught various things about those race people from a white perspective rather than from the perspective of a black person whose ancestors were slaves, were kidnapped in another continent, brought here and forced to work. The history has been from the white perspective. I know my history. It all comes from England and Northern Europe. And that's all we ever heard in school was the Lewis and Clark expedition. Sacagawea was the person of focus because she was a Native American, but it never went past that. And in my volunteer work that I do, I've learned that, you know, there's a such thing called ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act for foster kids. And what I learned through that is that the Native Americans say it takes a village to raise a child, not two parents. the whole village is responsible for. That's a difference in culture, and that's never been taught in anything I see even going on now.
Thanks, Neil. Laura.
Laura has a comment. Laura, go ahead and.
One thing I was struck by in the interchange was, Chairman Cummings, I mean, we know now he was in the last months of his life, had to speak to this man, this white man who was basically verbally accosting him, right? Like, you defend me, I've backed you up, you've got to do this, right? So he's being directed. And a woman who's a representative and is a woman of color sharing her perspective, and she's being talked over, shouted over. 78% of the US House of Representatives is white. So there were a whole bunch of people sitting in that room who could have functioned as allies and could have interrupted that. And we don't have to change the Mark Meadows in the room, but for 78% of us to sit there and let him behave like that and look to Eli Cummings, who's like dying, right, to have to face that and to watch a woman who's a young congresswoman and who's like being such a strong leader to be talked over and disrespected, like that's where we step in, right? Like that's where we as white people have a responsibility, not to talk over Representative Cummings or to talk over Rashida Tlaib, but to stop and say, we need to listen to what she's saying, and what she's saying, how you feel about what she's saying is not what this is about. It's about what happened. And we need to listen respectfully to that. And right now, whether you call it racism or you call it false accusation, you're being disrespectful. I'm calling you to stop that. And what he was saying was the same thing that was said by the man who referred to AOC as a FNB, and then he said, I've got a daughter and a wife, so I couldn't have said something terrible. And this guy's like, I have a niece and a nephew, so I couldn't have done something racist. Like, we're done. And the only way people get away with making those excuses is because we as white people let them. And that's our job.
That's right.
Exactly, Laura.
Very good, Laura. Very good. And you
Laura,
said
thank you.
You're running for Congress when? I'll help you be your campaign manager. Anyone else? This is actually on the road to a breakout, but I'm enjoying the big group conversation, so I'm going to let it go for a while.
Well, I just wanted to add that I think it's interesting to think about how changing a paradigm, changing words, although words like racism, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the good and bad, whatever that was about.
Binary.
Yes. I'm not there yet. Because words live through agreement. And right now the word racism is used as a hammer. And so for that to change, for enough people to change that, I really don't know an answer. I'm just saying that it is hard to take a word from one paradigm and use it in another, because we come to it with agreement. That was not helpful. It was just thought.
No, it was good, Bobby. Very good. I really appreciate it. Laura helped answer the question real definitively, is where do we go from here? And it's our responsibility. Somebody else, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that we're all products of the education that we received. And as Father Fred was saying, we need to change the curriculum. But the sad thing is that the people who write the curriculum, who write the textbooks, believe the garbage that they put in there. And so you've got to educate the textbook writers. So it all starts with education. And I believe that some people are willfully ignorant, but the majority of us are ignorant because we've been taught from ignorance.
Very well said.
Oh, I like that. I may have to quote that.
Well, you know,
Very
you
good.
know,
Copyrighted, it's copyrighted. McCoy's got it copyrighted. I'm her agent, I know.
It's
you know,
ignorance and it's also money. One of the reasons we end up with the educational textbooks we do is because Texas buys them. And
that's
if
right.
Texas buys them, and if Texas sets the price, then other people go with that. And Texas has been strong in saying, we want our history books not to say this and to say this. And there is not ignorance, there is purposeful changing of history in the books, and then it's like we're kind of sheep with our money, cheap sheep with our money. Anyway,
Bobby, and Carol, yeah, I'm really glad you brought the Texas business up because they have a great deal of sway over how history is being written. And as I recall, and I don't want to bet on this, but as I recall, like for instance, the Civil War in books that are being used in Texas, it's the war between the states, not the Civil War. And I think that's right. But anyway, yeah, Texas is a big part of this whole thing on history books and on textbooks in general.
I do think education is an important part of this, but to kind of steal a phrase, education is much too important to be left to educators. The people that I respect most in this world are, I guess you'd call them autodidacts. With the internet and with all the books that have been written, there is a wealth of things. If we want to take the time and the energy to educate ourselves, there are many resources available. We just have to dive into them, engage with other people, and take charge of our own learning.
I think people don't know what they don't know, so you don't know to even look. If you're ignorant, you don't know that you're ignorant. You know what I'm saying? You don't know what you don't know. And I don't think that the vast majority of the people in the Midwest are knowingly ignorant. They don't know that they're ignorant. I mean, even
No, you're right.
liberals and conservatives, people operate from what they know, and
They
you
elect-
don't. Yeah.
They elected a QAnon member this cycle. But you're right. I hate quoting Donald Rumsfeld, but that's one of his quotes that I agree with. That the different kinds of lacks of knowledge and not knowing what we don't know is a big problem.
Ethar has mentioned that we need to engage and empower parents in the education process. If the messages at home and school don't align, that can be very bad for children and their education. Truth. Well, this is very good, very rich, and I would say that we may not be able to change Mr. Meadows, but we can change ourselves, and we have influence about those other people in our area of influence that we can change as well, or certainly stimulate change. And just remember that white fragility is pretty predictable, and it shows up in the form of emotions, behaviors, and claims. And if we could just change that paradigm where the responsive emotions are more like they're appropriate and they're even, and the behaviors are calm and reflective, you're being open and you're ready to listen, and the claims are about, if you make any, are about inclusion, wanting to listen, to learn, and inviting some dialogue to understand. That's where we're headed from here. And that is how we change, or what a new paradigm looks like. And so I have two questions.
Greg,
Yes.
can I stop you for just a second?
Of
Carol
course.
has no video and she would like to make some comments.
Oh,
before we
okay.
move on. Carol?
Please.
The only way I knew to get attention was to unmute myself, but then I realized, no, that just unmutes myself. That doesn't really say that I want a word in. As a retired teacher, these are the areas that I think all need to be changed. So I'll list the ones that I can think of, and then you please tell me which ones you have some influence over. In order for kids who are in school now to have a more complete education, it means changing textbooks, other resource materials beyond the text, changing teachers. I don't mean change their names, I mean change their teaching methods, changing the people who teach at the college level, changing the attitudes of the school administration, of the school boards, of the community, including business leaders, pastors, government officials, and last but not least, it means listening to and changing what the students themselves are advocating for. Okay, do you have an in with any student?
Can I
Do
respond
you
to that?
go to a school board meeting and ask questions? Or, I mean, where can we as adults in this country influence any of those?
Yeah, can I respond to that, Carol?
Please.
Okay. Just my first impression, and I thank you for that, because those are good questions and good areas. But for the textbooks, and if I'm going to take your question literal, where can I respond to it? I'm an educator and I teach at the university level. And so I actually have the ability to say yes or no to textbooks that I use in my classes, and also to talk to my colleagues about that. And I can also talk to my students about textbook history, about textbooks that I use or don't use, and about the real accuracy of history. The resources I use in class are the ones I choose. So I have full control over that. And the teaching of, what'd you say, teaching? Oh, the teaching of the teachers, you know, like, so in service, and then how do we train and teach teachers? My university is a teaching college. And so I'm actually working with a colleague in the College of Education, and we have got a successful contract to go out and do anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion training to city governments starting in the winter. And the college or university needs to hire people that have this. I mean, that's how you influence them. And the school board, you run for it. Fred mentioned that he's got somebody that he's talked to about running for the school board. You get people that are like-minded to run for office. That's a great starting point. And then for businesses and community, you join Rotary, City Club. You get actively involved in, you know, civic engagement, and you get your message out there. There's all kinds of room, in my opinion, to influence those institutions that you mentioned. You just got to be willing to do it. Got to be creative. Got to know other people.
Yeah.
That's probably 10 cents plus.
Yeah, and Carol is making really good points, and it all varies geographically. What we can do out here on the West Coast, for example, in Oregon, at a small liberal arts college, it's not named liberal arts just for fun. We have a tendency to be a little bit more progressive, a little bit more open, but you get in other areas of the country that may be much more traditional and much more embedded in the systemic racism that don't want to change. And that's where the fun begins. That's where the change is so needed. And it starts in places like hearing rooms, like Laura said, where someone could say, that's not appropriate, or I've heard enough. It starts in the streets with groups of people that we have not listened to. And if they have to get loud, got to get raunchy to get our attention, so be it. And it's just, and we've been saying this the whole last 45 minutes, that there's so many different ways that we can change ourselves that then can change our communities. And it's there for the taking.
All right, thank you. I want to mention something else that I've seen work really, really well, both in Oregon and also historically. And that's something I don't think it's been around a long time, but when I was in politics, we did it from time to time, but that's town hall meetings. And I don't mean town hall meetings where you go and sit in a row and like good little puppies, you sit there and you take what's said. But what I've been seeing and hearing about are people that have town hall meetings from members of Congress and in both the House and the Senate, who go to town hall meetings and they hear what the people are thinking. And so I think that's another area. Now, town hall meetings don't just work for members of Congress. State legislators have town hall meetings. And so these are all areas. You can go to school, you can go, as Lori was saying, you can go to school board meetings. And there's an open forum, usually a school board meeting where you can talk. But I think it's really important for folks who have views like what we're talking about to be a part of these town halls and also these board meetings, county commissions, and like as far as school curriculum, you're talking school board, you're talking about state legislature mostly. But I think this is important. I really do.
Very good. Thank you, Fred. I really, really appreciate Carol's list, her list, because she's right.
Totally. Yeah.
It's not easy though. I make it sound easy when I responded, but it's not easy. I'm not saying that would, and there'd probably be a lot of failure along the way, but it can be done, and we'll never know if we don't start.
Hey, Greg, look
Yes,
at what Jackie just sent in a chat to everyone. And those of you that don't see your chats, a coalition of the willing. A coalition of the willing. That's the allyship is needed to outnumber those who are afraid of what equity and equality mean.
Right.
So.
Right. That's right. Right. And those are so two different terms. I realize my ignorance. Equity and equality, two different. But
There was a guy where my church is who was giving as a raffle. He gave an assault weapon and sold tickets so that you could buy. And guess who the recipient was the girls' softball team in the high school. And so we went to the city council. Guess who the president of the city council was? It was the guy that owned the gun store that was giving the raffle. Well, he's no longer on the city council, but they just had an election for I think it was 5 members of the city council. And he invited these candidates to come and to hear what his views were and to talk about people that could help elect these folks. A friend of mine was running for the city council. She didn't win, but she's viable and she'll come back again. But she asked me for advice, and I said I wouldn't do it. I just would not do that with him. But he was at the city council. So then what we did when one of his minions tried to push one of our members down the stairway in this building, we went to the school board meeting, and we told them that we were against this raffle, and we got them to agree that in the future the school board will approve all future raffles before they can have them. So we thought we did pretty well, and our school board member didn't fall down the stairs, but anyway, that's what we did. So. Also, there's another guy that offered a gun raffle up near Portland in the Lake Oswego area. And so the priest of the local church bought all the raffle tickets. And obviously he won the prize. And so he had the gun melted down then. So.
Welcome to the wild, wild west.
Right.
course.
Carol mentioned in chat about how it's difficult sometimes with your working and trying to make ends meet, perhaps to run for the school board, have the time to do that. And that's true. It takes personal commitment and time. And
That's right.
it's a stretch. It takes a lot of work. So it's not easy for everybody to do that. But that she says you can make connections with people that are on the board, which is true.
That's right.
Martin.
What Fred said was not the only reason, but it's interesting to note that Lake Oswego priest is now running a food cart in Portland.
Yeah.
That was one issue. It wasn't the only issue that caused that result, but it was part of it. So taking a stand on your beliefs sometimes has a cost associated with it, but it's still the right thing to do.
Right. All right.
We kind of lost it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay, okay. How can we make a change? A couple of projects in our community, both with the mayor and more importantly, the city manager. So what they're doing now, and every city goes through this process. I don't care whether it's or Vision 30, the 2030 vision for the city at this point. And they look at it every year, and especially here in our local community where we've had a lot of changes. Father Fred, of course, so I'm going to mention to both our leaders of our city, the mayor happens to be one of my neighbor, and also the city manager, that you're
Rich, you're breaking up, and so we're getting
about number one. Okay, well, I'll just drop it there then.
I would like to hear what Rich said.
I want to
Is there-
mention just one thing. One of the key points. Well, one of the key points. Quality of life, equally to all, and that's what I'm going to get the ear of both our leaders of our community, and of course that would be also reflected down to the city council. But we have a meeting that goes.
It sounds really good. Rich, we can't.
So the Vision 2030, every city can use to make a change.
Laurie,
Yes.
I see Carol Christ has written a note here asking if Rich could type his ideas for us to read, because I think Rich was saying some important things, but we just couldn't hear with the.
Yeah, Janice and Rich, if you could put what Rich said in chat or email it to me so that I can get it out to everyone,
Yeah.
because he was
Yeah.
breaking up.
It sounds like what he's trying to say. I mean, he's got a plan to do some
Yeah.
action that deals
Yeah.
with a formal government planning process.
He does, yeah.
That,
Yeah.
our friends, is what we want to hear. That's what we want to do. That's his area of influence, perhaps. But let's learn more. He has a squirrel eating and nibbling on his Wi-Fi cable, apparently.
And Carol also said something about typed something and it goes for a second and then I lose it because I don't have that open.
She was referring to, because Rich was breaking up, having him
Yes.
put thoughts into chat.
Yes, before that she was saying something about grandparents.
Oh, I will read to you what she said. She said, if you're retired or wealthy enough to take time off of work, then being on the school board is a real option. But for any of us, we can get to know current board members and have conversations. The same is true with teachers, elementary and secondary.
Yeah.
My gosh, I never knew I was so non-social, because it's just I'm gonna have to figure out how to just like talk to someone and say, do you want to have tea or something like that, and talk. This is wow.
That's
I'm
excellent.
gonna have to change. I'm very unsocial, it seems.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
No, you seem very social. All right.
But you know, that's how it's done. Bobby, you just call somebody and you know, most of our local officials, you can pick up the phone and you can talk to them, and that's how it's done. You know, to reach out and build a relationship with them. You know, not everybody's going to run for the school board, no, but we can all get to know the members who are on the board. So, you know, so I think that's really important to
that's right.
to keep in
What
mind.
Rich was saying, thank you, Rich and Janice, for putting this into chat. Basically, what he was outlining is what's occurring in Dallas, Oregon. And it's the plan to talk to local leaders about equity and equality of life for everyone in the town through the ongoing Vision for the City plan. So thank you, Rich, for that, because, you know, every city and community have these long range goals that they look at and they review every year. And the community members need to make themselves heard, that it's inclusive, that it embraces everybody in the community. Thank you.
That's wonderful. All right. Well, I had plans to go into breakout, and it's on the topic of that paradigm. And I'll put it in the, I think I'd like to do that is for you to really maybe just kind of put some final thoughts and comments in a smaller group about really what we've been talking about in the big round, and then come back after about 10 minutes. And I'll put it in the chat box. 2 questions for you, basically. What are things you can do to change your racial paradigm to one of transparency, honesty, humility when confronting discussions of race? Either, you know, with yourself. It starts with us, right? It starts with ourselves first. So think about that. And then the second question is how can we get others to change their racial paradigm? That's the more tricky one. We may never reach Mark Meadows, but we can reach others. And we certainly can, at a minimum, model good racial justice. So let's go for 10 minutes. Lori, if you could send them off.
I will.